or the most important learning to me was that no, I have this here. It actually works, right? So there was a lot of debate as to how remote agile could be and what it would feel like, and I'm so happy that given the right context, and I think that is a really crucial aspect. Given the right context, it works totally well.
What I do miss in the remote thing is the bit of serendipity that you have. So meaning those accidental encounters that you have in your company, outside your company, that can lead to better ideas, new ideas. This I miss very much, even though there's lots of tools that might be supported in this thing. But then again, all those tools make it, again, intentional and not accidental anymore.
For me, Agile, and forgive me, is not at all about any practice, framework, method, before we haven't clarified individuals and interactions. I think it's no coincidence that it's the first sentence and not the last or somewhere in a corner. So the quality of interactions, of individuals' interactions, and I think there's more to it because it's individuals is already the problem, is actually attached to communication bandwidth. And two-dimensional, to me, is the limitation here.
I do find it very difficult to work online because a lot of what I do is about the small things where you see people interact. And you can't see people interact when they're all in front of a screen.
I have the fear that we sometimes miss apart what are the benefits we have based on that people know from one another from on-site. So I think we have to really learn how to make this long-term engagement, this deep work working. But on the other side, I'm amazed on the possibilities of what we can make an interaction, and deep interactions also work on remote.
I think when we met on the meetup, on the first meetup a year ago, no one expected that we would go into lockdown situations for another year, right? So we were really positive about how we are going to work together in future, and we were starting this series of meetup with a very positive pictures in mind, and some of them actually came true. We've had like 12 meetups or so in the past on different subjects, most of them around in the field of UX and Agile. After a year now, it's really a big pleasure to me to talk to some of the most senior Agile experts I've had the opportunity to meet during the last 10 years or so. So first of all, thank you everyone for joining that meetup. I'm really looking forward to having that conversation with you. And I'm just looking forward, really. Blessed to have you on board, and so nice to see you all.
Thank you very much. So now I would like to introduce our panel to you. So this meetup, if you have already attended one of our meetups, you know that we like to keep things quite interactive. So also you, the audience, I would like to encourage you to ask questions. As you know, we already have a mural board. So, I mean, feel free to, well, first of all, let us know where you're based. I already said that we have like kind of a GIF collection there. And of course, also you will see that later we will have a Q&A, as well as you can also add your thoughts on remote agile there. So as I said, we really encourage people to not just listen in and stay in the background, but please participate actively, ask questions that you have. And we'll probably also later have some breakout rooms for some networking, and also where you can just collect more questions that you might have. And yeah, just also use this as an opportunity to connect. Agile teams traditionally excel when their members are co-located, but with this abrupt shift to remote working in response to COVID, it has just challenged the typical approach to managing Agile teams. And that's why we're now here with several experts, and I would like you to introduce yourself. Maybe let's start with, well, Michael, let's start with you.
Yeah, thank you. Where should I start? I think one of the most important lessons of the last year to me was, and that's me coming from the background. Sorry, back online again. I think hope you can hear me. I think the first and foremost, or the most important learning to me was that I have this here. It actually works, right? So there was a lot of debate as to how remote agile could be and what it would feel like, and I'm so happy that given the right context, and I think that is a really crucial aspect. Given the right context, it works totally well. I'm working together with the team now for a year, a bit more than a year, like everyone, in a fully remote setting, and I would like to expand on the context and what it needs maybe later in the conversation. But to be quick on this, I think actually it is a sort of a design culture, I think, which is really helpful in terms of an open and transparent communication in the team. I think secondly, it is the communication bandwidth that is really helpful. I think if you're spread across the globe, you need to get the opportunity to actually talk to each other, and you need to talk to each other a lot, because that is the only way of communication that you have. It is limited in a way. And secondly, I think results, the focus on results is something that I figured was really super important when working together in an online setup during the last year. And in total, I'm just so happy that, as I said, it works.
Thank you very much, Michael, for your introduction. Also you already led me to my next question. Yeah, your biggest takeaway from this massive remote agile experiment.
You wanted to have the introduction or introduction and insights?
Well, Michael already gave me both, so let's continue with that. So,
Actually, Ralph, did the introduction part already.
So, Ralph, can you please introduce yourself and tell me a little bit more about your biggest takeaway from this massive remote agile experiment?
Yeah. Hi, I'm Ralph. I'm from Hamburg. I'm doing this agile stuff since a while. I'm a trainer, coach. I have in German also a podcast running. The part which I found quite interesting was actually, it's on the COVID time, was actually the part how we cope with stress. And how people deal with uncertainty. So I found it remarkable when people looked first on LinkedIn. So when you looked on March on LinkedIn, how many people had the point to show to have a show-off behavior that they since 10 years be remote experts, and actually we lost a bit the vulnerability part in there. We got lost in tools. It felt, a lot of things felt for me a bit like the first days of PowerPoint, just like the first days of Miro. Where people, just because it has features, we started to use them. So I think when you get into using it, the part where I'm really get keen on and interested is simplicity, using the uncertainty to create something great, where people say how to make that together work is a great chance to make things working. I agree with Michael that great environments, a good working environments, agile environments, have it easier to move over. I had several clients which said we just made the switch, even if they had paper boards, such as we were so clear on our work mode to move over, and others which were not so on that level, had not that clarity and had uncertainty how the work had high uncertainty. But on the other side, I have the fear that we sometimes miss apart what are the benefits we have based on that people know from one another from on site. So I think we have to really learn how to make this long-term engagement, this deep work working. But on the other side, I'm amazed on the possibilities of what we can make an interaction, and deep interactions also work on remote. Yeah, so this is a bit my takeaway. And I actually can see on my meter of my weight, I can see all the COVID waves actually.
That's one indicator.
Yeah.
Thank you. Jürgen, do you want to tell us a little bit more about your takeaways?
Yeah, perfect after Rolf. So you're into simplicity. I call myself a simplification officer, as I help people in organizations remove lots of complexity within the simplicity of less. Large-scale Scrum. So removing horizontal, vertical, and technical complexity, meaning consolidating functions, shedding obsolete roles, making sure we have faster decision cycles, cross-functional teams, all that stuff, but also the technical complexity, more of decoupling XP and DevOps practices. And I would even add spatial complexity. So really removing the complexity of different offices in different locations and all that stuff. So being remote. As such, in early February 2020, before COVID hit Europe, I was really publicly asking for an organization that would allow us to do a full remote less application. So today, my challenge became reality. I still think there's lots of possibilities, and indeed, it seems to be working. Then again, I find it a hell of a lot easier to adjust my creative workshops, like multi-team refinement sessions, where you have 60 people connecting with end users and customers working together to figure out what's the next best thing to do. This kind of on-the-spot adjustments are a lot easier in person than remote, to my current experience. So what I do miss in the remote thing is the bit of serendipity that you have. So meaning those accidental encounters that you have in your company, outside your company, that can lead to better ideas, new ideas. This I miss very much, even though there's lots of tools that might be supported in this thing. But then again, all those tools make it, again, intentional and not accidental anymore. So this is something I do miss. And let's be honest, it's just more fun all together in a room, isn't it?
Thank you. Gitte?
Yeah, so I'm an Agile coach. I'm in Stockholm. Well, I've been trying to figure out a different title than Agile coach, but I haven't found anything that really fits. A lot of what I work on is building relations, communication, psychological safety, more than I actually work on Agile things, except for retrospectives, which is also not Agile. So retrospective is something I worked on with everyone, but otherwise it's very much been about relations. And I do find it very difficult to work online, because a lot of what I do is about the small things where you see people interact. And you can't see people interact when they're all in front of a screen. Also the serendipity that Jürgen talked about, a lot of my work the last, 6-7 years have been close to coffee machines, because people don't want to kind of talk to me as a coach, but then they come up to me and kind of like, do you have a moment? And then we have a 2-hour conversation about something when it becomes more personal. So a lot of that is missing. And I think the fact that we also build relations that way with other departments, other people, I think a lot of the stuff that's really been working for us online have been the things where we already knew people. And I think there's good things about being remote. We have opportunities that we would never have before. I mean, normally we would meet, some of these people have been used to meeting maybe once a year, every second year. Now we have the opportunity to meet more often. We can do some things more effectively remote, but I think that we're missing out on a lot of things. And I think that's one of the things that I find really hard. So I'm one of the people who are really looking forward to going back into an office.
Thank you, Gitte. And lastly, Mike?
Yeah, thank you. I think I just have to clarify, but I'm more of a consultant in the Agile space nowadays than a coach, and more of a professional coach than an Agile coach. So there might be a tweak around it. So I'm not going with the standard definitions, and there is, by the way, no standard definition. I love to work with systems, so I love to focus on relationships. And let's say it this way, my experience of the past 1 year has been probably the same as everyone's. No surprise, we're still there. No surprise, we could make use of bandwidth and tools and devices. It's all affordable. Would the same have happened 20 years ago? We would be in other problems, right? We would now say, hey, how can we remote workly with telephones and modems and things like that, and see how we can get together on Skype, right? Anyway, so it worked. And what we did was out of a chaotic situation, right? We had to act. There was no choice. I'm pretty happy about our business development because, you know, we've got people who are now working full time, 4 days a week for clients since 1 year without any interruption. We're making great revenue. I'm building new business models, so we're doing self-service, all the same stuff everybody does. So that's one thing. It's interesting, and I love to play around with technology. So we can immediately jump on one call to the other. So yesterday, I think I was in multiple continents around 14 hours, and I was totally tired in the evening. And I think that is the other one, the social bit. I mean, that's a question about competence, but how do we deal with these things? How do we deal with our calendar? But I saw a lot of people now being basically worn out emotionally. And I still believe in what Gitte said. There is, you know, for me, Agile, and forgive me, is not at all about any practice, framework, method before we haven't clarified individuals and interactions. I think it's no coincidence that it's the first sentence and not the last or somewhere in a corner. So the quality of interactions, of individuals' interactions, and I think there's more to it because it's individuals is already the problem, is actually attached to communication bandwidth. And two-dimensional, to me, is the limitation here. I can't smell you, I can't see you. I see your backgrounds, it's great, but if I get closer to you, I can't feel it. It's just two-dimensional. And so I've seen a lot of things that work, and I believe this will be a great discussion tonight.
Mike, the first sentence in the Agile Manifesto is uncovering better ways. So maybe VR, three-dimensional, would also already be benefit now, uncovering better ways, you know, and then the values could be a guidance to uncover.
Yeah, sure. I mean, it's always a matter of personal perspective. And again, I studied informatics, but nowadays I'm more focusing on people than technology. So to be honest, I prefer people, you know, people as we are. And it has been always the same. I love to have my mother in the room than on the telephone or video and being there and there. So if I say quality of interaction, there is something to it which we can still explore. Great, you already checked in and we have a heated discussion.
Good started.
Hopefully.
We're allowed to.
Yeah, I'm very happy that we have so many different perspectives here. And I think it's also going to make for a really interesting discussion. So actually the question that I would like to start off this discussion with is it actually possible to create team cohesion in remote agile teams, and in what way?
You mean in remote compared to before, or what do you mean?
Remote compared to before, yes.
My experience is yes. And actually, so I wanted to actually disagree on some parts with the deep communications, because honestly, one thing which I wanted to do January last year is I wanted to build an online program. I was running through my house because I had the experience that we had, for example, in the program from Christopher Avery, deep conversations in a long run, and things were possible. I said, this is possible to do. And I was quite interested to see that, to build something like that for Scrum Masters in there, because I thought we need that. And I was a bit frustrated that in March, everybody was put their nose on that it's possible. Because I said I could take 2 years time and nobody would move into it. But the other part which I experienced when you have, for example, if a team has a challenge, if you have a group which has a goal, which has a challenge, and for me, the part of remote work, if a group of people accepts the remote work as a challenge where they have to deal with and doing that, and you're, for example, having good interactions where you really, people look, how can we frame and interact with that, moving into that. I made the experience that people are able to adapt to that situations, having a deeper conversation, having also as a team to get closer to one another, to know one another, and actually asking for the social part on top of it, step by step, even more. So we had that even if this part was missing and people pulled it in. So this is my experience in there. I developed some games, for example, also for making this start, to get this the people really fast. I think we have to look also to help people smash fast into one another to see also some challenges, and having parts where you are slower. And in this combination, I think I was surprised how much more than I expected is possible.
I do agree that things are possible. I'm not that much in favor of the let's do a game to build some connection. So for me, the connection comes from actually collaborating on the challenge and doing the work. So, and try to make the work more fun. If you create more fun in the work, work made fun gets done. So, and if your work becomes a fun activity to work with and your colleagues to work with, then the bonding is coming like as by default. And I have now set up a small less adoption in person, and then in, I think, July, August. So during the COVID, we expanded product definition and added a couple of more teams to it. Brand new teams coming from different departments. They started bonding at a similar pace as the in-person ones. So there's not even, timing-wise, we're pretty much in the same thing. Even though they never met, even today, they still never met personally in person yet.
Yeah, but what I meant is actually, I think we are not disagreeing, because I think the real glue of a team comes from taking a challenge and mastering it. I just say the uncertainty of how to make it possible remote, you can help people to get a taste of that in front, and taking a bit of that uncertainty that they can get faster into it and utilize it in that way, not just play fun around, to make it more simulation and getting fastly into what you're saying.
But I do think it's also important to build those connections, because it makes it easier to talk to each other. And one of the things we did as an experiment when I was working with the Swedish television was we had like a 3-day kickoff thing we had every time after Christmas and after the summer vacation, to kind of go, let's get started. Let's look at all our team agreements and focus on something. And one of the things we did was like this a scavenger hunt remote, where they had to solve a task together. And it was an experiment, and we were kind of like, this could be really terrible and people will hate it. But actually it turned out that they really liked it, and they liked that because we tried to mix people from different teams, they really liked that they were not together with someone that they normally worked with, and that they had something to talk about that was not work. So they didn't have to figure out what to talk about. And the other experiment we did was to kind of have like a coffee roulette, so that during the breaks you could kind of sign up for that, and then you would be put together with a random person. And that totally didn't work. Not a single person signed up. And it turned out that it was because they're kind of like, when we do these kickoff days, we are already interacting all the time. So we need time away. But when we're doing our normal work, it's kind of fun to have these. I actually think it's a built-in feature in Slack that you can kind of sign up for this, and then you can get a remote coffee partner. But I think we do need to build those relations. And I think some of the things we are also not seeing properly yet, because a lot of the teams who are working together now still worked together before.
Gitte, if you want to, I put a link to Coffee Call, which is a service where you can subscribe to, and then you can say, okay, I'm having a coffee and open for any kind of talk, and then you get randomly somebody assigned that also is taking coffee for a random chat.
Oh, cool.
And they in the tool itself, they have icebreakers. So if you don't know what they talk about, you get an icebreaker that gets you starting.
Can you already marry actually remotely and live a marriage remotely?
Most probably there are Indian services that will help you out.
Could actually happen. I mean, you know what I mean. There are certain. I mean, I know there is telephone sex out there since 20 years or 30 years. I don't know. So you can do a couple of things remotely, but obviously there are some preferences for some people. Some people only, and some people prefer the other one. And I couldn't discuss this in a way to say either or, because it is obviously a question of personal flavor. It is obviously a question also about corporate culture, with what works in a certain environment, what works for a certain company, and so on and so forth. And let's be clear, currently, we can't say yet a lot about details, because we're still all in the middle of the Stockholm syndrome. I'm not talking about Gitte now, who is in Stockholm, but we're currently locked up, right? And that could continue for the next 5 years, because we don't know what comes from India. There's currently a new virus combination from South Africa, and we don't know. So maybe it's the new normal is just, hey, we don't meet people anymore, and that helps us with a global population, right? going a little bit lower. But so again, I knew people, and everybody knew probably people like startups who worked 10 years ago, no, 5 years ago. I knew one where they said, hey, I worked from Malaysia with a Viennese startup. And when I was in Malaysia, I had my best time collaborating with my colleagues. No surprise. It really doesn't surprise me. But there is just sort of a desire for people to meet in a room, to have this ad hoc, to experience together, to experience something, some after work beer, right? That's hardly possible remotely, to have fun and not do it at the front of a camera, but in a nice garden, right? By the way, I still love traveling. To say, when I think about, I did a lot of workshops in South Africa. And it took me 10 hours getting there and was really exhausting. But guess what? It was 3 years ago, or 4 years ago. I'm still thinking about this amazing experience I had with certain specific people, which hardly I can remember anyone whom I worked on the screen over the past 1 year. So there is some difference, right? I just want to say there is a difference. I don't want to say there is a better one, but the difference has some positive connotation.
Well, I currently think about, I think we have currently, I agree with you, we have a proportion of people which have a preference to go back. We have some people which tell you, I love it. And if you have an honest conversation and they really have the choice, which say, honestly, I want to go back. And then we have people which have a certain benefit or like it. For example, I currently have a second-time twins and can currently work and go outside of this room and have my babies on the arm, for example, and couldn't do that. And traveling in some parts was exhausting for me. I think we will have the real A/B test we will have when there's a choice again. And we will also see how big is the group of people which pretend to like remote and which really like remote, because some people currently run on, I love it. I love my job to get paid. So I think there is this part in there, but we can, for example, talk about the enablers we have behind there, what is possible and what not.
Want to be more of a mix. So my feeling, my personal feeling now is that I would love a mix. So in 2019, for example, I went 38 or 39 times in a plane and out a plane. So this is what I miss as well, Mike, being abroad, discovering new countries, by the way, new cultures, new people. In that sense. Then again, if I look at the time saved and let's be honest, my ecological footprint, I think there's some mix, like not the 39 times in a plane anymore, but maybe only 15 times in a plane and the rest doing remote. I think this mix would suit me better, my ecological footprint. Most probably my kids would like me also a lot more than they did in 2019.
Yeah, that's an amazing thing, because probably I'm not sure what everybody's wearing underneath the camera line, right? It's quite interesting. When I jump into a workshop in the morning, you know, I come directly from the shower and might say, oh shit, I should dress at least upwards a little bit, and then I've got a document camera, and sometimes it happened once to me that a co-facilitator of mine sent me a direct message and said, Mike, what are you wearing actually sitting next to the table? It was boxer shorts, right? No worries. And I think there was just, I don't know, it was Mickey Mouse or something. I can't remember.
Bob Zani posted actually a warning where he said, by the way, if you're working since 9 months in a jogging pants, I give you the high recommendation, try if your trousers still fit. And there, because it might be a surprise if you need them again.
But let me bring it back to a serious conversation. I think that's what we're here for.
It was a serious issue for me.
No, sure. But to another one, where just recently I heard a conversation where people really said, you know, they said, I can't just work with a sloppy, dress sitting in front of my desk. So I really dress up as I would go to the office, so that it makes me feel now I'm at work, to make this difference, right? To say, hey, I'm not private. And it was interesting. I couldn't relate to it. I don't have this problem, but I recognized there were at least 4 people who discussed the same thing, right? And I can imagine there are.
Please keep your camera, by the way, up.
No, but I think there's something about this having where you kind of deliberately go to work. And that's also like, I try to always sit at my desk when I do work. Now, before, when I was working in an office, I would do work in my sofa like Ralph does. But I try now to kind of more deliberately go to my desk and this is where I work, because otherwise it becomes this whole mix. And the mix between when I work and when I don't kind of gets muddled, which is kind of funny because like something like this for me, like we're having now, to me this is not work. This is just hanging out with some people having a good discussion. But so it's more about, you know, being in all those meetings. Like one of the places I worked, we had like meeting hell, because everything had to be a meeting, and you would have no breaks in between. And when I tried to suggest we should have meetings, I was told, well, people are used to not going to the bathroom until 4. Yep. And then I said, well, maybe we should be role models.
Oh, but you know, they call it here in Zoom participants, but it's not really participants, is it?
Yeah.
So these bathroom breaks are happening.
I would like to bring it a bit back to the topic of specifically of team cohesion and how to create team cohesion in remote agile teams. And now, I don't remember exactly who said it, but one of you also said that, well, I mean, team cohesion, it was also a bit easier maybe to create because there was already some team cohesion, because the teams that you were working with, a lot of the members of the teams were already members of the team before, so before going remote. So now what I'd like to ask you is it possible to create team cohesion in remote companies? So when you onboard team members remotely, and here I would also hear a little bit about your experience and like, how did it, for example, work onboarding new members of your team remotely? You never met them. So versus actually working remotely with team members that you met in the office before.
So Nora, that's what we did in August, and that's what we are going to do next week. So next week we are going to onboard actually double the amount of teams behind a single product backlog. We call this a Kaikaku event because people were not from the same company even. So joining the company, all different skills, different departments in the past. We are going to spend 8 days just building up the foundations on building and becoming a good team. First with maybe lots of agreements that they make up themselves. Later on, they can throw them away again, whatever. So another practice that for me is crucial to do this is mob programming. I work in software development, but mob programming, not only with the techies. By the way, I see way too many organizations thinking mob programming is for the techies. It's not. So mob programming is there for functional, architectural, tech, tests, anybody that is part of the team and needed their skills or mind to actually get something done. So, and if you do mobs and you facilitate mobs very well, for example, I start mobs in a dojo style, meaning you have one driver, one navigator, the others are observers. So people are somehow entitled to start to actively listen to each other. If somebody else from the observers becomes a navigator, they need to continue on the ID that was started. So it's not about my ID, your ID, any ID that works is good enough. So you allow people to listen into each other more actively, to continue on each other's IDs more appropriately. As a driver, as a navigator, once they do this very well, you can have all navigators, one driver. And this, for me, is tremendously working very well to build connections within the teams. So the fun part with a mob Gitte is if you need to go to the bathroom, you just go to the bathroom. Nobody complains. No. You can just step out and step in whenever you want. No. And this, I think, is also very important. I see too many people saying, okay, you need to have your video on. So when we work as a team, we need to start the day as a team, and we need to keep our video on for the full day. I think this is very stressful.
Yeah.
So I rather have working as a mob, and if you're not there, put your video out, move out, stop it completely, jump in again, but have this freedom as well that you have it on and off whenever you feel like it, and not because you have to, because now it's a rule.
I think that's also some of the stuff that the remote coaches are writing about, the 2 women from South Africa, Kirsten and Jay Ellen. And it's also something I experienced, is that the teams where it worked the best were where they agreed on if they wanted the camera on or not. So I think all of them had at some point during the day. Like the ones where they did it the least, they would still have during their dailies, they would have the camera on because they kind of liked seeing each other. And the ones who didn't use the camera as much, they agreed to write in they had this one Slack channel that they basically used to kind of write, oh, I'm leaving the keyboard, or I'm going for lunch, or so kind of a status thing almost, because people felt that even though they couldn't see them, it felt nice to know if they were there or not. But then there's also the whole problem with bandwidth. I mean, or actually having cameras. I was just working with H&M, and a lot of the Indian colleagues did not have cameras. So it was not possible for them to have cameras on.
Yeah, the typical thing I currently still experience with corporates when you do a workshop or anything is VPN. So we're told not to use the VPN too much. So people all turn the camera off. So usually then we create accounts on our platform so they can basically just jump around and do something, as long as they are allowed to configure the laptop or anything, or then use the private laptops, which they're probably not allowed to. But what is interesting, I mean, some people even have the problem to see themselves, right? They don't feel comfortable when they see them. So there is the advice to say, hey, with Zoom, you can switch yourself out here, right? Then you don't feel as observing yourself. I sometimes compare it though, and I totally understand this sort of psychological safety step towards like, hey, don't squeeze people, don't force them. On the other hand side, it's sometimes really terrible if you're a facilitator and look at a black wall, right, and say, anybody actually still here? Could you give a life sign every 10 seconds or something, like you have to do when you run a tramway, right? To say, I'm still, no, not tramway, but also the railway, the locomotives. And sometimes I compare it like what's actually happening in our society and organizations, because would you see the same in an on-site workshop, that people wear something on top of their head and just don't show up, or they're not coming actually into the main room, they just stay outside and put a microphone in there? So what is interesting, and I'm not putting it into the conversation, isn't this situation now confronting us, basically giving us a mirror, how bad or not good our communication is, what we might rethink and redesign into various directions. I'm not giving any preference now, saying it has to be this or that.
I think the part the cycle we moved over the last year is actually that a lot of people, especially at the beginning, put it out, you have to do it. There was a lot of things like, if you run a workshop, you have to have 2 monitors. I actually run on that sofa for 9 months a workshop with a 13-inch laptop. And I was always looking what I did wrong till I met Teams, and I realized that I can't configure it to work with a 13-inch laptop on Teams, but on Zoom it works, for example. So I think the part is something we had a lot in there. And I really like Jürgen's point to say the key part to get people together is actually to get them work. And what I realize is helpful is to have something in fast cycles, something where people really fast focused in this first beginning, get to know one another, to get really into a cohesion, not necessarily only talking. So because my feeling was, when people make agreements, we have all these assumptions coming in there at the beginning. The part in there is how to get it work, get things where people see things failing and bring that into the conversation and adjust from that. Worked for me better than putting all the assumptions on the table.
Totally. I mean, picking up the idea I think the foundation that Gitte brought up at the very beginning, it is like building that connection. And my feeling was that moving online sort of changed the game, because we have different tools. We get additional tools to create those connections, and then on the other hand, we lose certain tools in building connections. And that made it kind of difficult, because I think some people have preferences, right? I know that some people want to be close to other persons, and others want to keep the distance and that sort of thing. So I have the feeling that what happened at the very beginning, and it's still happening, is some sort of polarization, especially when we were speaking about cameras also. Like, are we using cameras or not, right? I think for me, the most important principle in Agile, and I think it's not written in that form, but it sums it up, is keep people in charge, right? Keep the people doing the work in charge. And that is true for using video or basically anything when it comes to organizing the workday.
This is great. Keep people in charge. I love it. And then you get this kind of request from a kind of especially financial organizations. Please help the teams. Do they have online whiteboards? No. Yeah, they have Microsoft whiteboard. What can we use for online communication? Microsoft Teams. That's about it. So can we use something else like for remote retrospectives? Can I use my own mural for you? Oh, no, you cannot. Please, Jurgen or Steven or Michael or Mike, yeah, please come and give us a course in LeSS or in Scrum or in remote working. But you need to do it in Teams and Microsoft Teams only, and you need to connect through our VPN because, you know, we go online, but everything needs to go through our own VPN. And then they complain that everything is slow or not working. Of course, you force everybody to go through your VPN, everybody in the company, outside the company. That's berserk. If you want to go remote, you need to put as much as you can outside your VPN. That's true remote working. If it's all through VPN, you don't do remote working. It's just an extended network.
One thing where Michael triggered me on is actually one thing which I do with people is working in the part that they get into a good collaboration. I ask them at the beginning what needs to be done that we have a good collaboration, that we have a good teamwork, for example, here. And I not ask them that I don't bring any rules anymore. I just bring, could you please everybody share now when we start working here together, and it takes over a while, could you please share what you think is most important that this works? And only when there's something urgent like which really needs to be clarified at the beginning, we clarify, but everything else we keep, first of all, just shared. And we look back after we started working, sometimes after half a day or a day, and then look back which of that parts we have to adjust to move more on. And that makes it more specific, which parts by coincidence anyway worked already for us, and which are the parts we really focused have a specific need to address. So this makes it really easier for me to get that into it.
I would love to add to what Jürgen said, because I experienced the same thing. That goes a little bit more to the more global, or let's say corporate level, more the organizational level. And of course, MS Teams, I mean, while they keep improving, and I'm still waiting for a few features, let's see when it comes, is really terrible in comparison to other opportunities. But on the other hand side, I think there is a challenge and a danger that we discuss this in a quite, relaxed way here and have a few drinks around it and say, why not giving everybody every freedom in the world? I'm jealous. And at the same time, large corporates still have some compliance topics and issues in order, in relation to data breach and data problems and spying and everything, which can easily be forgotten. I don't know, and I don't want to know what the hackers of the world could all explore in the past 12 months without anybody recognizing. I mean, our conversation is no problem that goes through China, but if you're a financial institution, and I love to take this seriously. I don't love to take this into, hey, let it be self-organized, 300,000 people, let's do what you want. And then, how often does private data show up somewhere on the internet? I think I read multiple times in the past few weeks that credit card data was stolen here and everywhere. Yeah. It's an issue. I don't have a solution for it, but I just want to take it serious. And right?
Security-wise, Mike, as you mentioned now, security-wise, what do you think is better? I put it all behind my VPN and a single sign-on system where I just need one user to share one password to get in, or I distribute it amongst many different systems that have their own login, that maybe have this encrypted towards your single sign-on, where they have their own login. So if I breach one thing, I have one tool. That's it. Versus
Jürgen, I wanted to back up Mike on that to say there is a part in there. The first big transformation where I was in, I later, 2 or 3 years later, was at the headquarters of this big organization, and we had this funny security Sally, make this check, look if somebody is looking from the back on your computer thing. And I said, what's this weird part? Because we were so far away. And then we were in this headquarters and there were all these Chinese people where you don't know who is the supplier and who is here to make pictures of things which are happening there. So there is creativity, there is a sensitivity behind there. And I think there are companies where you really have to take it serious. And it's an interesting part to think about how to do that.
True, but there
By the
are
way,
certain things,
Justin,
that's why I say you put as
yeah.
much as you can outside the VPN, not everything. Sensitive data.
Jürgen, I totally, so again, I just didn't want to see this black-white. I just wanted to get a little bit more shades in here. And what you said, sure, there is a possibility. And then who knows, it's super complex now to just set up another environment. That probably makes the next interesting question. What kind of work are we talking about, right? To say, make it work remotely. So guys who are now supposed to design complex computer architectures and systems, of course they can do it online. And it's great to pull somebody from America and India in and to have this opportunity globally as a global team. But then getting into the terrible, I don't use the other word, details, that's where the rubber hits the road. And then suddenly it's easier to have a whiteboard. And if you're the operations team and everything, it's not easy. And again, there's still a lot of topics to solve.
Yeah,
which I think what I wanted to emphasize with the it's probably an attitude that we are seeing in some organizations and not in others. I think some organizations are actually enabling the people in the way they work and giving them the freedom to design within the context, right? And the security is an issue. We're not going to solve that. We probably don't need to find answers right now. But very often I'm seeing that the organization tries to decide and put something over lots of people, which just doesn't work. And that I think is really important to get rid of those. So if I think it's always safe to sort of, well, no, it's not always safe to just let people decide and see what happens, but it's always safe to listen to people. And I think this is super important. You need to listen to the people's needs. Yeah.
My point, which I would like to add there is also the perspective. I have the feeling in a lot of companies, people are designing the solutions from what they think is the next super digital whatever and bring in fancy tools in there. And for example, outside of our work environment, which currently drives me nuts, are schools, because they're designing for tablets, for whatever. And most people have a bloody phone, right? And they design their solutions for everything and then say, oh, we don't have enough devices, but most people have a phone. And instead of saying which devices, I mean, in the school example, but also in others, which devices are available? What can we do with the possibilities there? How we bring it to the maximum we can do in there, and then look carefully, what is the next thing to bring in there? And I don't like that a lot of people go to the next shiny thing they can put on top of people to make them totally lost and insecure. This is something which really is good. For example, Gitte, when you start, for example, at Mentimeter as a company, which is a great tool, but on the other side, I started later to like to do some conversations. Can everybody just dump in a chat his thought to that and that question? Mm-hmm. And for 80% of the parts, a simple solution worked and is everywhere available. And a lot of people then complained about that they don't have Mentimeter. So how we make the simplest possible tools work, which actually get the people focused, and then look where we need the rest, all the fancy stuff.
Yeah, well, I mean, a lot of like retrospectives I've done, for instance, I've used Jamboard from Google, because it's so simple that you can't do much, which means that you don't focus very much on the tool. You just put up some things. And then what I find is there's some things you need to take into account, that I split people up more than I normally would do in a room, because it's hard to have a conversation when you're a lot of people in one room. So there's like things I do like that, but almost none of them have to do with the tools. And like personally, I've never really gotten into Miro or Mural, because I get very confused and I kind of like, whoa, I can do all these things, but really I just want to put up 3 Post-its. And that can sometimes be very confusing. So I think you're right. We are somehow also, I think the tools we're not looking at what do we actually need. We're looking at, ooh, now we need to use all these shiny tools and they can do all the things. Yes.
And we use all the things.
You are really hurting my feelings now. I'm a tool geek.
Yeah,
don't let us suffer for that.
For decades. So I feel personally offended now. No,
that's good. That's good. That was my plan.
Yeah, it's quite interesting. I mean, I see organizations and colleagues of mine even thinking about this complexity in a way that they say, I don't run a workshop alone, but I have a technical assistant, and I've witnessed this as another assistant, to say, not technical, but it was more content wise, and it was useful because then you can concentrate on the interaction and communication. Yeah, sure, costs additional money, but it might be that we underestimate the currently ad hoc thing, which is obviously working, towards professional solutions for getting really stuff done, right? Because it's so easy and cheap to get this stuff together. And I'm not telling you what kind of equipment is standing around me, talking cheap. There's nothing cheap here, but anyway.
I've tried this and I think it's really, really nice. When I was doing, I was talking at Agile testing days last year, they had like a technical person in the background, but we also had, so they asked some of the speakers to volunteer to kind of be the helper for the other speaker. So kind of, look out for questions, introduce them, small things like that. And it just made things so much easier. And you didn't even have to think about the technical part. Because that's often kind of like, oh, how do we open the breakout rooms and talk at the same time and all these things. And then some programs like Teams has the feature that only the person who invited for the meeting can open the breakout rooms.
Yeah.
I want to give a counterpart on this, because on the one side, I like the convenience, but we often had in the Agile community the part that we also built things fancier, like people went to visual facilitation classes and then lost attention to the audience, and we can build fancy boards and then somebody can maintain it. I think we can also win something when we keep it simple, when we keep it ugly. And if we, for example, ask participants, guys, we have this and this challenges, who is volunteering to help? And this creates more shared space. And I don't say the one thing for all and the other thing for all. I just say I have huge benefits when I say who helps to do it. And for example, my one online program, that people constantly remind me, don't put the phone into the microphone, for example, and Ralph, please start the recording button. And they're taking care of me, which is great. And it's shared ownership.
I was referring to, it's all context, right? It's all the question about context. I was referring to a professional coaching education, and the participants in this case, I think 20 participants, they were supposed to be, focusing not on technical stuff, but being served. And at the same time, the facilitators were supposed to focus on the interaction. So the setup was just more expensive, and it was worth it. But that brings me to another topic. And I think the topic which we didn't touch yet a lot is this sort of, what about stress level we have when we jump from one meeting to the other, because we're so terribly flexible now, right? After this meeting, we're going to choose somebody in the US, and afterwards, and hey, there's still another time zone, and it never stops. I know this is personal responsibility, but on the other hand side, we just see raw data where people are drawn in. So what are we going to do about that?
That's very good, a good point also regarding team cohesion, isn't it? Because I have the feeling that with a good sort of daily routine, you can on the one hand support team cohesion very well. At least that's from my experience. For example, we don't have any meetings. We don't really have meetings. What we do have is a time slot in the morning and a time slot in the afternoon, and we know we can meet each other at those times, right? And if you have that cohesion, if you know you have the opportunity, you can get rid of much of those meetings. But that really only works if you have that team cohesion on the other hand. Because if you're working in like 10 topics or 10 together with 10 teams and it's spread across the globe, then that sort of daily routine doesn't work. And I think that's why I think we can create team cohesion, and it's even more important, and it's super important to establish something like a daily routine that actually works for people.
Yeah, well, I think one thing we can also do is we can address it. We can address that it's good to actually have breaks. It's good to step away from the computer. We can only focus for about 45 to 50 minutes before our brain starts drifting. And I think that all of us, most of the people I see in the chat that I know, we are somehow role models. We are somehow either coaches or leaders, or, and even if you are not an official leader, you're still a role model. We can say, you know what, we should have a break right now. Let's step away from the computer. Or sometimes when I do workshops, I've done like find something green. And then mostly people have to leave their computer. Don't use blue. for some reason, almost everyone has something blue near their computer. But just to do that, to kind of have people step away a bit.
Doesn't everybody have a green screen behind them, Gitte? So here it is.
Yeah.
I think this hype is over.
No, that doesn't count. So tell them green screens don't count. It has to be some
Yeah.
green shiny object, a normal thing. Joking. Yeah, good advice. Yeah.
I have 2 blue dragons, for instance.
Actually, I would still like to move a little bit further into that topic, especially because it's a little bit the specialization of Gitte. How do you ensure psychological safety when working remote agile teams?
Well, so I'm actually surprised about how well some of the same techniques work when I'm doing a workshop. So some of the workshops that I do, for instance, on psychological safety or on courage, requires a lot more safety than when I teach them about retrospectives or something else. And some of the things that I do is, for instance, I state rules like, we are in this space to learn. It's okay to make mistakes. When I do the courage of psychological safety trainings, I say anything that's said in this room cannot leave it unless we actively agree upon it. So I have the kind of these set of rules. And I use some of the techniques also from Nancy Klein's Time to Think. So I do a check-in where everyone says something. It's okay to pass. But by saying pass, you have opened your mouth. And by saying something at least once, it's easier to say something. And I make it very, very obvious that it's okay to opt out, for instance, in a workshop. One of the things I learned a few years ago at a workshop I was at was, you are more important than this workshop. Which is an opinion I've always had. I just never heard it phrased that way. So I think we can do these things, but I think also the whole part about building relations, helping people know that they can do things, splitting them up in smaller groups, allowing them, it sounds like we're the ones deciding, but like we talked about with the cameras, do people have cameras on or off? I think all of these things help build the psychological safety. But I think we need to be more aware of it when we're online, because it's so easy to offend each other, for instance, because you can't see always the facial expression. I was at a conference where I am one of the safe people to go to if something happens with the code of conduct. And what I found out when we were remote was that people would also come to me and ask about stuff like, I think I offended this person, what should I do? Should I tell them, or is it just me being too sensitive? And my advice was to let them know and say, I would rather apologize one time too many than one time too little. So if I offended you, I'm very sorry about that. But kind of having someone that, like a trusted person that people can go to, can sometimes help. And I think then speaking up about things, like I said, about speaking up about, yes, this is really stressful. It's okay to take, hopefully companies will help people take a day off, putting in more breaks. I think a lot of these things will help us with the psychological safety as well. And then there are all the things that also count in the real world, like being curious about people, listening to people, making it a space where you can make mistakes, and where mistakes is something that is okay, that we can learn from. And I think especially as role models, whether that is trainers or coaches or leaders or team members, also showing our own vulnerability, showing, yes, you know, I made a mistake, or yes, I have a bad day, or I have a really good day. I think those things help us create that safety. What I sadly see a lot is that people are very good at saying they have this. And then if people do make mistakes, you know, they're told off, called into a meeting and told off, for instance. So it's so easy to break these things. And I think that talking about them is the first step of actually creating it.
I think I would love to add one thing, and that might be also a challenging one in the future, might be redesigned a little bit. Like the positive, the benefit of working from home is actually you're coming from a safe place, right? Most people feel safe at home, given you have a good relationship at home. So nobody's behind you and permanently threatening you. So that basically makes you somehow already gives you at least the option for safe entry, right? To say, hey, I decide here, it's my home, but I feel comfortable at home and I don't need to enter a room where, there is some smell in the air, some atmosphere. And then, as we know, suddenly comes a child behind. Suddenly there is a cat on the other side. I had this multiple times the other week. Not sure there was a cat week, and that suddenly hits in this personal thing. But the counter side, obviously, is what we said before. How able are we to separate private from business, right? I mean, work. I mean, I know separating in terms of time. I'm not saying work-life balance. I hate this word. I work and I live, but I want to spend time off work. And how easy is it to say, if I'm in this room where I'm currently, I do work, but if I go outside, I don't want to carry my video around. And that's where I'm curious how it will be when we come back to the normal. Well, people might jump in with video, but from their actual office, right? Which you're not allowed to enter currently, maybe. So that is something.
I find this very interesting. So not necessarily the work office, like we are lucky,
Yeah.
Apparently we all have our own work office at home. So many people are not. And I think now in COVID, you cannot even compare it to general remote work. So before COVID, there were already companies running fully remote. After COVID, there will be companies running fully remote. But during COVID, what is the most harmful in the connections is you don't see your family. You don't see your friends. You cannot travel to different countries. So it's not about the work life, it's more about my private life. And I really say private now, my private life that also gets cut down. And I think this is more, at least for me, more harmful than my work environment remote.
Mm-hmm.
And why this is like, okay, you see kids coming in, you see this coming in. So also because of extra COVID rules that come aside, it also influences your work environment again. And that's why I find your words very interesting, Mike. Yes, Michal.
Yeah, some people don't want to share. I mean, I think some of the reasons not everyone likes videos is also because they don't want to invite their colleagues into their home. But that's also the other part of it. But I think you're right, Jürgen. We can't rule out the private things because we're one person. And I mean, when I went to Denmark for my Christmas vacation, I haven't seen a person off screen for 27 days because I'm single, live alone. So there is this whole thing. We don't get the interaction. And there's research showing that even if we just walk to work and we see the same person taking the bus every day, we build a small relation in our brain and we're missing out on all these things. And I think you're right, that's a lot more stressful than actually working remote.
Yeah, I can totally relate to that. I think it was you, Mike, who said that you said a desire to meet people, right? And I can feel that from the bottom of my heart. And I think this is one of the hardest bits that we have to stomach during the COVID time. But I think about this, regarding this, we also have to understand that this is hopefully soon going to change a lot. And remote work is not the same, and online collaboration is not the same as the lockdown that we are currently trying to survive. And in that sense, I think it's worth pointing out explicitly that when I think about remote work and online collaboration, I explicitly also want to meet people that I have the desire to meet. And it's opening up so many other possibilities, right? I could actually meet Gitte, even though she's in Stockholm, because I'm free to choose where I want to do my work. So it's opening possibilities, it's opening options, and unfortunately, we don't have them currently. That's a fact.
Yeah, like we have already mentioned this several times during our previous meetups. It's very important to just emphasize, of course, right now, this is not normal remote working. And whatever context we're talking about, in the past, we also had meetups about UX design, user research. We had meetups about remote HR and so on. It's just important to emphasize that right now, we have this remote work experiment, but it's not real remote working, especially for the ones that have been working for a long time remotely. It's very different, and also, of course, challenging for people who have been working remotely for a long time. And so just kind of to make this maybe clear. Now, two things. First of all, also for all participants for the in the audience, I'll share the link to the Moro board just one more time, like in case you missed it. Please check out the Moro board, and you can also leave your questions there. I saw one question in the chat. We're going to come back to it. And also, if you have any thoughts on remote agile, please feel free to also just add them on the Moro board. And also, if you want LinkedIn, Twitter, whatever, to connect, you can also leave it on the Moro board. And now I would like to move the discussion a little bit more in direction of agile methods. So what do you think, which agile methods and frameworks worked maybe better or worse in a remote setting? And do you maybe also have any recommendations for people, any tips?
My only tip is, again, mop. Start doing mops more often. And it doesn't matter which framework or other misery you are applying.
I'm still thinking about, and that to me, again, I would immediately also say, well, those which don't work now, you probably didn't work before, like the big scaling. Sorry, Jürgen, I'm not going into directions. Scaling is a decision, actually, where you have to do some things and where you do make trade-offs in terms of communication, right? The more people, the more challenged is communication. That's just it. But sometimes 5 people can't solve the big problem, right? But I'm still thinking about the famous diagram Alistair Cockburn drew in the early 2000s, right, about communication bandwidth. And he had already video there, I have it in front of me, where he put it quite high in richness of communication channel and in relation to effectiveness of communication. But above it was face-to-face and face-to-face at a whiteboard. And I'm not sure, and that you can relate now to all of the methods, right? Hey, Scrum team here, whatever they do. If it's a flavor of personal preference, or if it's actually, and I think we're still lacking research, a different level of outcome, right? Like saying still a physical whiteboard face-to-face, I mean, real face-to-face still beats video. I'm not sure if that's just the comparison of 2002 video was different quality, or if it's, you know, I think Google is at home, Apple is at home, all these big companies are at home. So I couldn't see this other than scaling. Scaling is probably the biggest challenge. On the other hand side, well, it's a challenge as such, right?
And isn't it in lots of the scaling that lots of the communication needs could happen asynchronously, that you don't need this high bandwidth, that for creative thinking and things like that, you will most probably need a high bandwidth things to happen. And also there you uncover better ways, because I'm a tool geek from my child years. I get invited to things, and like, for example, with the Oculus now and lots of the new startup VR environment, it's getting better. I'm not saying it's good, but it's still very expensive.
Yeah.
And that's the key factor. So if this gets cheaper, then it's an improvement. It's still not the same thing. So I'll never say it's the same thing as, by the way. But
again, that's technology, right? And I with all the change that we have seen in the field of agile and product development in general, I think there's 2 things which are discussed a lot and didn't keep up the promise. One is frameworks and methods. I really think it doesn't matter. And the second thing is tools. Also, everyone is talking about methods, everyone is talking about tools, and I strongly believe they don't actually matter. I have the feeling, but that's just, I don't have statistics, it's just my personal perception, that during the last year, the difference between good facilitation on a workshop and not so well done facilitation is much bigger than the difference between being on site and not being on site, like doing it online or offline. Yeah.
I would add another flavor, just the question what Jürgen said before. I think the question is, what do we mean by communication? You know, communication can be multiple things. Now, suddenly everybody of the 1,000 people can immediately put a Post-it note on Miro. No problem. Hey, here we have it. And we cluster them in 30 minutes and that's it, right? It's a totally different type of communication if I say like, I want to feel you. I want to see the every thing you look at me, how you make a difference. But I can't see that in the video. So it's a different way, right? And there is no right, wrong. There is, for different context, maybe a different kind of conversation helpful. But Ralph, you wanted to jump in.
Yeah, well, I thought about the original question on the methods in there, and for me, I also wouldn't state a preference on one of the methods in there. I think it's qualities in the methods in there. And I would state there 3 things. First of all, I think we need something like a shared platform where people can interact together. I think they should help us to get clarity on ceremonies and interactions we have. And we should have feedback in there. And this is something you can achieve with Scrum. This is something you can achieve with Kanban. But if this is really clearly there before you, for example, move from offline to online, I thought companies which had the 3 qualities, it really worked well. So this is, first of all, the part in there where I think when you can achieve the 3 qualities with Scrum, fine. If you can achieve it with Kanban, fine. If you can achieve it with less, fine. I saw additional as one approach which I use a lot is Sociocracy 3.0, because if we use such approaches like the patterns from there, like consent and making some parts of rituals explicit, it helps us to get more into this clarity and interaction and interactions which we're building up, which is quite helpful. And also having explicit consent. Are you buying and can we move on with that, or can we make a disagreement explicit in there? So this is a part which I see in there, but I honestly wouldn't put a preference in there. And when I have that, I think we often talk about what we lost from the offline world, but we also have to look on there. We win things, and actually, I think I go on Michael's part of there. I think we're currently too biased to judge on that. We see the stuff we lost, and people look on the stuff we lost 3 times more than that we win. And there are parts in there from dynamic, asynchronous parts in there, which can have benefits. And I think we are currently too biased to judge, is it worth or better in there? I think it's just different. And we have to look to master the challenges and the opportunities in there. And then later we need to have research to see what really was better.
Mm-hmm. I mean, there's one thing that I'm totally convinced that is a big issue for us currently when it comes to communication, and that is we have limited control over the context or where communications happen. As you said, it usually happens in people's homes, which could be very safe, but sometimes we need to, we are working in a very user-centric way, so we are trying to observe a lot how users are solving the problems, and sometimes video is helpful because like everybody is on video and we can jump instantly, like globally, right? We have access to users and we can watch them. But then we are doing other projects, like we're developing a 101 game where we would want to observe kids, like how are they solving the 101? How are they doing it? And that's not possible. You cannot do a video installation and sort of monitor kids and see how they solve problems. So there's very limited control as to the context on the other side of the communication channel.
That's why, like Mike was saying, evaluating the communication need. What do you need from the communication in this interaction, or is the part of the process? And depending on that, you will need a higher level, lower level, different kinds of communication could fit the need.
But I think that one of the problems I see is I think we could, like you said, Jürgen, we can solve a lot of things with asynchronous information. But the thing is that people kind of don't want to produce that. They want to have it available, but to be able to use it without context, other than just reading things, for instance, it needs to have a certain quality. And people don't seem interested in actually creating things like that.
I think if you apply this kind of working out loud, this is what we are talking about. You start sharing whatever you do, work related, has 2 methods. So you are transparent, so it gives you some good feeling. You can acquire fast feedback, Rolf, which you were mentioning, so which is all great. But if you do this with a bunch of people, and Steven that is here can comprehend, because in co-learning, for example, so we had this kind of rule: we work out loud, we have lots of async, but you get a flood of information. Mm-hmm. So you cannot expect, for example, and this might be occur with new people that joined us, for example, over time. We saw them having the expectation or the intention to read everything. You cannot. This is impossible. This is information overload. So even though if you do this working out loud, don't expect others to have read it. And the other way around, if you're following this kind of behavioral pattern in your organization, then don't feel forced to read everything as well, unless you're explicitly mentioned, of course. Stephen, am I right or wrong? Okay.
But isn't there also the risk when we do too much asynchronous communication that people move apart and that we lose this cohesiveness? Because I had one TED Talk, a great metaphor where people say, if you want to have a divorce, you can master that as a couple when you have problems to decide the TV program just by a second TV with two remotes so that you move apart from one another. And I have the feeling if we move to asynchronous, it's sometimes like everybody moves to his corner and we have to look to a part that it stays together.
The thing is, you need to put the communication, like Mike was saying, in the context of the need.
Yeah.
If I need to collaborate as a team between a front end, a back end, a UXer, a database scientist, then we need to have high bandwidth. Then this is not the right way.
We have to have an explicit decision on. We have an explicit decision on the clarity on the need.
Yes.
Yeah.
Just considering the time, sorry, I'd like to interrupt. Jürgen, actually a question for you that was asked a little bit earlier, like maybe half an hour ago. Someone said, now you plan a whole week, even two, as I understood, for the flip. Did it take more or less time in an office setting? Similarities, differences?
If it would be in person, in a big room, because we are talking about 10 teams here, then it would have taken less time. Because now we are spending, we designed it, so having quite some okay time and slack time and breaks in between and all that stuff. But we need 8 days to something which we did previously with less teams, by the way, but similar needs and outcomes expected in a full week in an in-person setting. So why is it? Because in person, we have, to be honest, we have small sessions. We have more breaks in person, but during the breaks, still work is happening. So unconsciously, people are continuing the conversation so that when they enter again, they have moved forward. They have progressed their thinking. In a remote setting, we don't have this. So, and this is a bit of the trouble that in effectiveness that you lose in a remote world. Another thing that we see in a remote world is the so if you look at the screen too long, then you have this eye fatigue coming in. So there is a rule, the 20-20 rule. So every 20 minutes, you look at something 2 meters away from you for 20 seconds, and this will help your eyes adjust continuously. But this is not good enough. So you need to allow people to have rest in their eyes, but also in their brains to go there. So also there, we do 3-hour sessions in the morning, 3-hour sessions in the afternoon, but with breaks. So which is pretty short in touch time. If you compare to a full day in person, that's completely different. Your touch time is a lot higher. So touch time based, I think we are pretty much at the same thing, but lead time based, it's going to be longer.
Okay, thank you. I actually would like to follow that up with another question that I just saw in the chat. I'm not sure if this is for a particular speaker, so just feel free, whoever has some thoughts on it, to answer. What are your insights about the Gresham's law, bad online meeting drives out good? Do you experience it?
To try to understand it.
So if you, I assume, I don't know the law, by the way, but I assume it's stating like if you have great people on board and you have bad online meetings, the good people will go away. This is what I understood.
Feel free. Also, the question comes from Blase.
I'll elaborate on that. What I'm experienced, especially in big companies that are new to remote work, is that people are flooded with remote meetings, and it's much more easier to schedule a bad quality remote meeting. what I also see is that people are also eager to join just to schedule their day, so they are busy. So did you experience it, and what are your insights on that? So COVID started, people worked alone on the keyboards, but meetings occurred, much more meetings, people were called in, and this became actually a new normal. So yeah. What are your insights on that? Question to everyone.
I've seen this in some organizations where you kind of have meetings all day and way too many people are in the meetings. And you might have one or two that's really, really good, but that kind of vanishes in all the other stuff. So people start zoning out from meetings. So yes, I have seen this, and you really need to actively think about this. It's also like you want to have a meeting with 3 people, and you go like, yeah, we can have one in 3 weeks because that's the first time we have a time slot. So I see this a lot, but I think it's also part of it is because everything becomes a meeting. Because we can't just say, oh, do you want to go over to the whiteboard? We go like, okay, now I need to book a meeting with those people. So yes, I have seen this. And I've also seen places where it's not like that, where they deliberately go like, we have meeting-free Tuesdays, for instance. So I think it depends on the organization.
And this is, I agree with your, okay, everything where we used to say just on a whiteboard or in the corridor, let's have a chat, now needs to become a meeting. So that's one part. Another part is the mirroring, like Mike was talking about before. You know, if it's bad meeting remote, who is telling you it was not as such inside? But inside, it doesn't feel that's strainful to you because you walk to a meeting, and then you have a coffee while you have a meeting, you walk away, you have a chat to another meeting room. So you have physical movement, you have some relaxing in your head, you have some ending talk before you enter the next meeting. And the disadvantage now, or the advantage, or the mirroring, is that with the remote world, it's from one immediately into the other. There's no like zooming out and zooming in. There is no this chit chat and walk physical movement anymore. So this mirror hits you a hell of a lot more into your face than it was before. So maybe before there was already a very bad meeting culture, but you didn't feel it as such.
I would like to add that we most of the time we inherit another problem, and that is that the way organizations are designed, very often they are not designed around the idea of agile teams working together very closely. So you have lots of dependencies to other teams, and if you have that, it's very hard to sort of build up routines that actually work. As I said before, we hardly have meetings. We make it a priority to have like high cohesion teams that work together on a daily basis, and even and that opens new possibilities also communication wise, because we have this afternoon coffee session every day where we don't actually have an agenda, but if there is someone not from our team but from outside, we can always invite them to the coffee session. We can just tell them, look, you can join every day, it doesn't matter. And that also helps us to sort of solve the problem that we have these accidental encounters in a way, right? Because sometimes for those coffee sessions we don't know what's going to happen.
I just wanted to add shortly, for me the point in there is we currently talk about them, but honestly, at least it was also me. It's like, some people have that. No, a lot of people of us challenged in that we didn't have to move from one meeting to another. It's not them. It was me, for example. Yeah. I had weeks in there where first got the bottleneck lost in there that I could schedule fast meetings, and then I got lost in there, and then I had bad meetings just because I was highly efficient to move into there, but I had no time to digest, to prepare proper for them and move out of them, and I had to get used to how to find for myself more rules to deal with that. So it's not the organization; it's me. So and I have to look into that, and I got better at it, but I sometimes fall back.
And another third aspect that I have seen, not in my current environment, by the way, but something that I have seen is that the there was a really top-down work way of controlling and really micromanaging. And once the COVID hit in, then a friend of mine that is giving conversations during evening remote drinks, Blasé, you have been part in evening remote drinks yourself as well with me, so you know what I'm talking about. But they were discussing as well, and they are booking meetings. They are making sure somebody else is involved in an activity they do, so that there is proof that they are working.
Yeah.
So it's not even to be effective or actually doing work, it's to make sure that there is evidence that I'm doing work while being at home.
Yeah.
I think now we are at the work culture, right? I mean, what kind of organizations did we see in these months where, again, you had the same problem with this command and control already? I think that's one of the points now looking into the future where we say, hey, we only want you to come to work because that's the only way that we can be sure you fulfill your contract, right? We're being paid. We don't know if you work at home, right? So that's basically the let's say, declaration of distrust. And I saw managers, and it's quite surprising, after 6 months saying, wow, my biggest learning as a leader was really that people worked. They still did something, and you just think, shit, as a leader, right? And okay, everybody in their own basin. But I wanted to add to the meetings, I think, and that probably it's a pity that we count these terrible numbers. I'm not sure if you still can hear it. I can't hear these numbers anymore. I'm watching it since a year, the typical trends, right? It would have been interesting really to track numbers and data in the organizations on the meetings to say, let's everyone please feedback on a permanent basis. How many meetings do you have? And how much do you think they contributed to better information or at least decision-making? So that basically we could have now a huge bunch of wealth of information to say, all right, this is trigger for redesign, right?
Very
Mike, we have done this with a customer of us, I think 5 or 6 years ago. There is this kind of flick buttons, which are USB related buttons you can hang everywhere, and we hang them in the meeting rooms.
Oh yeah, the red green
smiley faces collected in Google Docs with the API, collected in Google Docs to see trends. And if you saw a downward trend, you could see as well which event was happening.
Okay.
So some of the refinements, some of the review sessions, some of the other meetings that are so necessary. And then you can see what was more effective or less effective and start changing meeting culture as such.
Yeah.
But this is not remote, this was in person.
Thank you. Blasé, I hope that also answered your question. I would like to move on to the last question that we have here for the Q&A. To also close off the session. Do you have any tips for informal remote knowledge sharing within teams and cross-team?
I think if it's just knowledge sharing for the sake of knowledge sharing, there is no tips that will help you. If there's no problem to solve, then it's like those courses where they teach people on how to provide feedback. If the person is not willing to accept feedback, you can give it in any format you want. So the first thing you need to assess is there an interest of absorbing knowledge. If there is, then it might be successful. If there's no interest in absorbing, forget about it.
I think it also depends on what kind of,
If any, then it's the afternoon coffee session that we had. It's like the open coffee session where you sort of enable, it's a space that gives opportunities, however you use it, right?
No, I think it depends on what kind of information it is. I think, so last year I was working with Swedish Television and their news website is the only totally free news website in Sweden. So they actually changed their focus last summer to make sure that nothing could break down. Because they were kind of like, there was a lot of COVID, people needed the news and it was the only free one. So they put aside some new features and went in and kind of, the teams went in and looked through what are things we should have updated, but that we kind of waited a bit. And that kind of knowledge exchange, and also because different people would be there during the summer vacation, that kind of happened on its own and people were organizing things. And I think that if it's more like, how did I was going to say, make this system, or how do you do this? I think that needs a purpose. But then there's the other side of it, which I think is more like what's actually going on in your team. Like if you have a department with 6 teams, what are the other teams working on? Or even in your own team, if you're not doing mob programming, if you're working on different things, which we very often are, like what's actually going on? I think we need to, I think it's good to have stuff like that, whether we call it demo or whatever, but to kind of have maybe a monthly meeting where we kind of go, what's the most interesting thing we worked on in our team this month? But again, I think sometimes we do need to organize.
Gitte, if I'm working in your team and we work on different things, why would I be interested in your team? Because I have my own stuff to do.
Yeah, but this, we'll get answers first.
Well, it depends on, when I say other things, I mean, somebody might be, one of the things I've seen, for instance, is that some people will, prepare a little bit while other people will be working, or you'll be working on 2 different aspects of the same feature, for instance. If you still have the same, it depends on how the team is built. A lot of teams I see are built because they have like a product, for instance, and you may work on different sides of the product. Yeah. I'm not saying it's the best thing. No. I'm saying that's what I see a lot.
Yeah, I believe, Ralph, in your common challenge, and from there on, go continue. So please, Ralph.
Yeah, I just wanted to add on that. I see 2 things for that. The one thing is putting on top of what Gitte said, was I think we sometimes have the point how to get from the right granularity of knowledge in there. For example, when we talk about when we with different teams, for example, working on something, that we have to look on how to make it possible that we have it on the right level. For example, when we look to a review, to a sprint review, something like that people relate, this is what we did, this is related to the bigger picture, and learn that we get to a point that the level of not talking about this is what I did in my detail expert, but that we can follow up what we have there together, I think is a key thing which we need online and offline. But the biggest tip which I currently have on what I see as benefit to learn on the other part, what its demand there is, for me, is changing from a push to pull mentality, not setting up brown bag sessions where people do their ego numbers and say, I have the next fancy shit which I can share with everybody and I'm the coolest guy ever. I like to change it off, that we have the demand side from what is really needed and gather with people, and then ask people which questions or which stuff do you want to learn, and then find somebody to tell something about what people want to learn and not what they want to present. And by switching it from asking people what they want to learn, find internally who can talk about that, shifts so much from this is the next fancy part to can somebody show me how to use this because I'm lost.
I would love to add a final bit. Knowledge sharing it tends to be like, hey, everybody knows what they know. And obviously we talked about Agile, we know less about what we know. We know, we don't know what we know, potentially, or don't know. So tacit knowledge, is obviously is where Scrum is coming from. And so for me, it's this question of how do we create new insights, knowledge? Where do we create these spaces where serendipity can hit in? And so I'm still more with what Michael said. I mean, there is the social part anyway, but when it comes to knowledge, where are these ad hoc or let's say more relaxed spaces you can create consciously, which are obviously not meetings. So not meetings, and areas where people just get together and share and share also maybe cross-line topics where we don't say on what's on our plan and this is being discussed, but topics which are a little bit off the actual red line, but that's where the innovation comes from. All right, yeah, that's it. So you could have done this earlier, then I could have avoided wasting 5 minutes. Thank you. So that would be my stance here, just to say, get out some of the meetings of the calendar of people, make free space for this more getting together and opening up minds and bringing people together and creating new knowledge and insight.
But now you have to tell us what the Serendipity Club is.
I think
29 euros per month, probably, right?
Yeah, no, 7 years ago, being involved in the Belgian startup community, and then we kickstarted something in my local town to get entrepreneurs, founders, and investors together. But also early stage startups. which is great for serendipity. Accidental, so many of them didn't continue with their idea, but started combining ideas and moved forward.
That's what I meant. Yeah, cool.
Now, I ran this for I think about 2 or 3 years, and then I stopped.
Okay, cool. Any last thoughts still from maybe Michael? I hope this answered the question regarding learning and remote knowledge sharing.
I think we're over time a bit already, so it's not from my side.
Okay, then thank you very much for first of all to our panelists for joining the panel discussion. It was really interesting, and I hope also all of the participants could take something away from it. Thank you so much also for your questions. As said, feel free to also just leave your contact details on the Moral board if you want to connect. And I hope to see you during the next We Are Online meetup.